You have been almost saying something for a long time now. Not a word spoken out loud, not a message sent. Something quieter than that. The moment where the thought forms completely, where everything in you aligns toward expression, and then something stops you. A breath held back at the last second, an impulse that reached the surface and then folded. You know this feeling not because it happened once, but because it has become a habit you didn't choose. The almost, the not quite, the thousand small rehearsals of something that never made it out of the body and into the air. And underneath that habit, underneath all those small retreats, something has been waiting. Not with urgency, not with the sharp edge of want that makes the waiting painful. Something quieter than want. Something that has learned to be still while still being completely, irreversibly alive. You have been carrying a readiness that was never given the right conditions to land. The kind of readiness that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand to be noticed, simply continues to exist in the interior like a room, you know. Is there even when the door stays closed? Today, something about those conditions changes. And the change is not gradual. It does not arrive as a subtle shift you might miss if you aren't paying attention. It arrives the way all precise astronomical events arrive, as a fact, already complete, already in effect, your awareness of it simply the last thing to catch up. You didn't find this by accident. What brought you here isn't the algorithm. It's the part of you that has been tracking this moment longer than your conscious mind has had language for it. Before we go deeper, anchor yourself into what you are already feeling. Like this video, subscribe and leave a comment. I am ready to receive. Not for the engagement, for you. As the first honest thing you've said out loud in a while about where you actually stand. Because what comes next is the part most people miss. The specific reason why today, of all the days you have waited, is the one where the waiting completes itself. There is something precise happening in the sky right now. And precise is exactly the right word. Because this is not vague spiritual energy, not a general sense of things shifting. This is the last day Venus moves through Cancer. Tomorrow she enters Leo. And what that means for you is not metaphor. It is the closing of a very specific emotional window, one that has been quietly doing real work on you for weeks, and the opening of a completely different one. The question is not whether you feel it. You already do. The question is whether you understand what you are actually standing inside of right now. You earned the right to stand here, not through suffering, though there has been that. Not through wanting it badly enough. Wanting alone does not open this kind of door. You earned it through something most people never do. You maintained a standard you never announced. At some point, you were standing at a fork where one direction was easier, more immediately relieving, where what you were holding could simply be set down, explained away, folded into a version of events that asked less of you. The option presented itself more than once, dressed in perfectly reasonable language about moving on and accepting things as they were. You chose the other direction, not loudly, not with a speech or a ceremony, just a quiet internal choice that nobody witnessed and nobody confirmed was right. You kept holding something real instead of trading it for something easier. And that choice, private, unconfirmed, made in the specific absence of any external reward for making it, is the credential this moment requires. Not that you were noble, not that you were patient in the inspirational sense, but that you didn't compromise what you knew to be true about what love is supposed to feel like, even when compromising would have been so much more immediately available. That quiet refusal to pretend something was enough when you knew it wasn't. That is exactly what built the ground you're standing on right now. And it's why this window is open for you today in a way it simply isn't for everyone who wanted something similar. Here is what is actually happening in the sky today, and why it matters for the specific thing you have been carrying. Venus is the planetary force that governs where we place our heart. Not love as a concept, love as a lived, daily, embodied thing. Where we put our attention without meaning to. What we allow to matter more than we planned. What we keep returning to, even when returning costs us something. It is not soft. It is not decorative. It is the part of the human interior that insists on meaning. While Venus has been moving through Cancer these past weeks, all of that reaching has been happening inside the territory of home, memory, and emotional truth. Cancer is not a romantic sign in the sparkling surface sense. It is the sign of what is real, what is felt too deeply for performance, what lives in the body as certainty rather than in the mind as hope. It keeps returning you to what is actually true beneath whatever you have constructed over the top of it. And now Venus is leaving. Today is the last day of this transit. By tomorrow, she is in Leo, a completely different territory, one of radiance and confidence and the self choosing to be seen in full light. But today, in these final hours of Venus in Cancer, something crystallizes. The emotional work this transit has been doing in the background, the slow, private clarification, the gradual separation of what is real from what was simply familiar, reaches a point of completion. What has been felt privately becomes undeniable. What has been almost said becomes the only true thing left to say. Mercury, the planet that governs words, communication, the bridge between what is felt and what is spoken, is under significant pressure right now. Mercury is in Cancer too, moving through a tense encounter with Saturn in Aries. Saturn is the force that builds walls, imposes delays, creates the experience of something that wants to come forward being held back. Mercury square. Saturn is the specific planetary experience of the throat tightening before the truth comes out, of thoughts forming completely and then being swallowed, of the right words existing fully formed inside the body and not quite making it through to the air. But here is what matters about that pressure. It is not Mercury being prevented from communicating. It is Mercury being tested. Saturn's pressure is the resistance that separates what is genuinely true, what has enough weight to push through the wall, from what was only almost true, what would have emerged and then collapsed. What breaks through Saturn is not urgency. It is not volume. It is something that has been gathering force long enough that the resistance can no longer maintain its shape against it. This is not the universe closing a door. This is the universe holding one open for exactly as long as it needs to be held. And today, in this specific window, what wanted to come through has finally gathered enough truth behind it to arrive. This is not ordinary emotional experience. This is not the feeling of wanting something you haven't received. This is the specific frequency of something that was always going to land, landing exactly when it was always going to land. This portal does not activate for everyone who has been waiting for something. Most people wait from urgency, from the need for the external answer to arrive and resolve the internal question. That kind of waiting does not build anything. It only measures the distance between where you are and where you want to be, and fills the interior with that measurement constantly. Nothing genuine can be built inside that kind of waiting, because nothing genuine can be received from the posture of urgency. What urgency receives, it immediately converts into evidence for or against something about itself. What opened this window for you is different. And it opened through what you chose not to do. You didn't reach out when every part of you wanted to. You know the specific moment, or the specific kind of moment, where the impulse was real, The justification was available, and you stopped yourself anyway. Not because you didn't want to, because something in you recognized what the reaching would have cost. What that restraint built is not pride. It is a kind of self-knowledge that only comes from having stopped yourself at the exact moment you most wanted to move. You didn't explain yourself when the urge to be understood was almost unbearable. You kept something inside, rather than performing it for someone who had not yet earned the right to receive it. Those words stayed clean because of that choice. What you held in silence kept the quality that making it public would have diluted. You didn't lower the standard simply because holding it meant being alone with it for longer than felt reasonable. That particular act, staying honest about what love is supposed to feel like, even when that honesty came with real cost, built something in you that cannot be undone. It cannot be argued away, cannot be reasoned out of you, cannot be worn down by time or by fatigue. It is now part of how you are built. That was not love failing. That was love being honest. Honest about what it required, honest about what the situation was, rather than what you needed it to be. That was not you being unworthy of receiving. That was them being unready to give what the connection needed. That was not the universe withholding. That was the universe building the exact conditions under which what arrives will actually be able to stay. And what you have built inside yourself, through all of that quiet refusal, is a knowing that cannot be talked out of you. Not the knowing of someone who is right and needs an outcome to confirm it. The knowing of someone who is simply honest. Honesty of that quality doesn't require a result to remain real. And that is the only credential this kind of door has ever asked for. There is something specific that would have happened if this had arrived 6 months ago, a year ago. It is worth understanding what that would have looked like, because understanding it is part of what makes the timing feel like precision rather than punishment. You would have received whatever came with the full weight of your unresolved question still active inside it. That question, the one that asked whether you were enough, whether what you felt was real or only wished, whether you were someone worth the full honest choice of, was still alive then. Not as a conscious thought, as the shape through which you received things. And if the connection had reopened while that question was still the receiving organ, you would not have been receiving the connection. You would have been receiving it as an answer to the question. The person, the words, the arrival itself, all of it would have been processed not as what it actually was, but as evidence for or against something about yourself that was still unresolved. That version of the story would have felt, for a while, like everything. The arrival would have temporarily quieted the question. You would have called that quiet resolution. And then, within weeks or months, the question would have returned, and the dynamic would have begun reorganizing itself around the question again. And you would have found yourself in the same place, wondering why the return hadn't fixed what you thought it would fix. The delay, in that light, was not cruelty. It was the universe refusing to give you something in a form you couldn't actually receive yet. Saturn's delays are not random. They are not punishment. They are the specific enforcement of readiness. The insistence that what arrives must be able to land in the right interior conditions, or it lands wrong and costs more than it gives. What's different now is not that enough time passed. Time passing alone does nothing. What's different is that the question changed. The question that used to govern your receiving, am I enough? Is this real? Do I deserve to be chosen clearly? No longer requires an outside answer to settle. Not because you decided to stop asking, because the asking ran out of energy. Something inside you quietly completed the process that question was trying to force. And what's left is not an answer. It is the absence of the question itself. That absence changes everything about how what arrives now will land. What comes now will be received as something real between two people, rather than as resolution of an internal question you are using it to answer. The door is open not because the waiting ended. The door is open because you no longer need what's on the other side to tell you something about yourself. On the other side of this silence, something is happening. And it is worth understanding precisely what that is. The person connected to you is not someone who doesn't know what they feel. They are not suppressing it, not rationalizing it away, not pretending it isn't there. It is present. It is active. They know exactly what it is. What is holding them at the edge of action is the full, unfiltered weight of what honesty would require of them. What they would have to admit about what they want, about the choices they made, about what the silence has actually meant, is not a small admission. It is the kind of honesty that changes the story of the past as well as the direction of the future. Standing at the edge of that is a particular kind of stillness, not peace. The held breath quality of a moment before a step that cannot be taken back. Mercury square Saturn is acting on them too, and in their specific situation, it is making the restraint harder to maintain. The planetary pressure that creates the experience of something wanting to come forward but being held back is intensifying. They feel the window closing. They may not have language for it. But the body knows before the mind catches up. And something in the quality of today has communicated to them, in the language the body speaks below the threshold of conscious thought, that what has been left unsaid cannot be left unsaid indefinitely. The heaviness they are carrying right now is not grief. It is the specific physical sensation of being almost ready. The weight that gathers in the body before a decision that has been postponed becomes impossible to postpone further. Indistinguishable in the body from courage gathering. They are at the edge of the almost, same as you, approaching it from the other direction. What they do with it is theirs to carry. The recognition doesn't ask their permission. It arrived, it is real, and it is already changing the calculation, whether or not they have acknowledged it yet. You are standing at a fork right now, and the fork looks simple from the outside. It is not. The fork in the road looks identical from the outside. The difference is entirely interior, and entirely everything. One direction is the one you already know well. It has a particular texture, a kind of background hum of management. The low-level monitoring that runs constantly. What does this mean? What should I do? What's about to happen? How do I stay ready for it? The orientation of someone perpetually preparing for the next wave. Keeping one hand on the situation so it doesn't shift while you're not paying attention. That direction is not bad. It kept you safe for a long time. In an environment where presence was intermittent, where things shifted without warning, the management system was the most intelligent response available. It protected something real. But it comes with a cost that has been invisible because it has been constant. When the management of what might happen fills the interior, there is no room for simply being inside what is. What arrives gets processed through the management system before it reaches you. You assess it before you receive it. You protect yourself from the full size of it before you find out what it actually is. The other direction has a completely different quality. Not indifference, not the absence of caring. That would be easy to misread it as, and it is not that at all. It is something that has no urgency in its texture, a quietness in the interior that doesn't come from suppressing the caring, but from no longer needing the outcome to arrive in a specific shape before the caring can remain intact. Allowing what comes to arrive at its actual size and its actual form, without the automatic reduction that protection requires. Can you feel the difference between those two states right now? Not as a description, as something alive in the body at this exact moment. One of them grips around what arrives. The other opens to receive it without reduction. Here is the specific question that separates them. Not as an intellectual puzzle, but as something the body will answer before the mind finishes forming it. Does what you feel require a specific outcome to remain real? Or is what you feel already independent of whether any particular thing happens? That question, held in the body rather than analyzed in the mind, will show you exactly where you actually are. Not where you intended to be, not where you hope you are. Where you are. And that location is the only honest starting point for what comes next. Before this connection, there was a version of you who understood love as something that arrived when you finally did enough of the right things, stayed patient enough, gave generously enough, made yourself available and clear and understandable enough that eventually the receiving would follow as a natural consequence of the giving. Love as something earned through sufficient quality of effort. The soul contract you entered with this person was not a romantic arrangement, whatever it looked like on the surface. It was a precise agreement about what you needed to learn, specifically about timing, about the difference between love and readiness, about why the right connection at the wrong internal moment is still the wrong moment. The lesson of timing is one of the most difficult lessons the soul can undertake, because it feels, from inside the learning, like deprivation, like being kept from something real. The experience of the lesson looks almost indistinguishable from loss. You love someone. The love is real. The connection is genuine. And yet the timing is not right, not because the love is wrong, but because love that arrives before both people are internally ready becomes something other than what it's supposed to be. It becomes urgency masquerading as connection. It becomes the activation of wounds rather than the meeting of whole people. What this connection came to teach was not patience. Patience is endurance. It is the management of waiting. This was something finer and harder than patience. This was the slow, quiet process of learning that readiness is not a decision. It is a development. You cannot decide to be ready. You can only do the work that readiness requires, and then discover, at some point you cannot predict in advance, that the development has completed itself. There is real grief in this recognition. It deserves full acknowledgement, because it means the delay was not their fault, and it was not your fault, and it was not a mistake anyone made. And grief without a specific target is harder to move through than grief that has someone to blame. You gave real things into this. You made real choices in its direction. And to understand now that the timing itself was the curriculum, not the obstacle but the lesson, does not make those gifts smaller. What you gave was genuine. What it did was develop you into someone capable of receiving what's coming next without losing your clarity in the receiving. The contract did not promise an outcome. It promised a change in who you are, and that promise has already been kept. What completion looks like through the lens of timing is this. You stop trying to force arrival before both people are genuinely ready. Not because you stopped caring, because you stopped needing the arrival to be proof of the caring. The love can be fully real, and the moment can be not yet right, and those two facts can coexist without the first one invalidating the second. That is the integration. And you know you have genuinely arrived at it, not as a decision you made, but as something that became true in you. Because holding both facts at once no longer creates the specific kind of pain it once did. What ends here is not the love. What ends is the version of the connection that could only exist while the lesson was still unfinished. The love, if it was real, does not require the old dynamic to survive. Your body has already received this transmission before your mind finished processing it. There is a quiet in the chest that has no urgency behind it. Not the quiet of numbness. You know the difference now. And that distinction matters more than it used to. Numbness is flat. It has a deadened quality, a thickness between you and what you feel. This is not that. This is a quiet that is fully alive, fully present, simply not running the alarm system anymore. The alarm system that used to activate around this connection, the one that made certain thoughts arrive with their own emergency soundtrack, has been running quieter for a while now. This week in particular, it is noticeably quieter. Sleep is arriving earlier, not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself. Just a few minutes sooner than usual, the way a body settles when the background program it was running in the interior has finally been allowed to close. Something that was keeping a low-grade vigil through the night has gotten some permission to rest. A name. The name that used to arrive in awareness with a particular tightening, a particular rapid reorganization of the whole interior around its presence, is passing through differently now. It still arrives. It would be dishonest to say it doesn't. But where it once reorganized everything on contact, pulling attention into its orbit and keeping it there, it now passes more like weather. It comes, it is recognized, and then it continues moving without the body needing to brace against its departure. That is not small. That is the signature of something genuinely integrating. You may notice the jaw releasing in the middle of ordinary moments. Not in a moment you prepared for, not during a meditation or a deliberate practice. In the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a task, your hands know without thinking. The jaw simply lets go of something it has been holding without instruction, without a reason you can name. That is the nervous system completing a process at its own timing. The way bodies complete things when they are finally allowed to. The quality of the first few minutes after waking is different. There used to be a lag, a moment of almost okayness before the familiar weight returned, before whatever had been running in the background of sleep resumed its position in the foreground of waking. That lag is shortening. Some mornings it doesn't come at all. The body surfaces into the day already settled, rather than already resuming a posture of readiness against something difficult. This is not detachment. This is not the body going quiet because it has given up or stopped caring. These are settling signals, the specific physical signatures of something that has stopped bracing for impact. Not numb, still. And the difference between those two states, between managed stillness and genuine stillness, is something your body now knows from the inside rather than from description. Your body is not confused. It is recalibrating. And the specific calibration happening now is this. The nervous system is learning the difference between preparing for arrival and preparing for loss. It has spent a long time doing the second. It is being asked now to practice the first. The life that is stabilizing around you right now does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks like quiet decisions that complete themselves without the usual internal argument. Decisions that used to require several rounds of back and forth. The careful negotiation between what you want and what seems acceptable, between what is true and what is safe to admit is true, are completing in fewer cycles now. Not because the decisions became simpler, because the internal conflict that complicated them has lost most of its momentum. The things that used to require a decision no longer do. The body has already made it. Quietly, without drama, without a moment you can point to and say that is when it changed. It simply stopped being available for certain costs. Not because you decided to raise your standards as an act of will. Because what the standards always were became impossible to unknow. And unknowing things that are already fully known takes more energy than anyone can sustain indefinitely. What used to register as exciting because of its uncertainty, the connection that kept you slightly off balance, the dynamic that could go any direction, the relationship that had just enough ambiguity to feel like possibility, registers differently now. Before the hollow quality even fully forms, before it has arrived at the surface of experience, the body has already named it. This is stimulation dressed as depth. This is the familiar chemistry of someone who isn't fully present, disguised as the electricity of something that might become real. You no longer confuse one for the other, not as a decision, as a biological fact. What used to feel like safety, the known, the familiar, the dynamic that didn't require you to grow into anything new, now has a ceiling you can feel clearly, not a comfortable container, a limit. And what was once grateful for limits now simply notices them, without drama, without the urgency to change them immediately, but with a clarity that makes pretending the limit isn't there no longer an available option. The universe is no longer trying to guide you toward alignment. It is beginning to respond to the alignment you already carry. What that means in practice, the connections that find you now carry a different quality. They arrive as contact rather than transaction. The conversations that happen in this frequency don't require the same level of translation. What you mean is now more clearly organized inside you before it leaves. Things that used to be questions have become knowledge. And knowledge moves through communication differently than questions do. The part of you that needed outside confirmation to feel certain has completed its work. What remains does not require reflection to stay real. It simply is. That is not a small change. That is the whole change. After this activation, certain things become unavailable to your nervous system, not as a decision, but as a biological reality. The system that learned to accommodate certain costs in the name of love, in the name of patience, in the name of giving someone the benefit of a doubt they had not yet earned. That system has been quietly reorganizing itself. What it will and will not sustain has changed. Being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel is no longer something the nervous system can process as normal or acceptable or worth the management it requires. That particular arrangement, where the awareness exists clearly on both sides, but only one side carries the full weight of it. Only one side shows up in the full size of what they feel, used to be navigable. You could find reasons for why someone would choose ambiguity over clarity. You could construct a generous interpretation of the distance. That capacity for construction is no longer available in the same way. It is not that you became less generous. It is that the construction now requires energy the body has reallocated to other things. Carrying the full weight of a connection while the other person remains comfortable in its ambiguity has become something the nervous system simply identifies as incompatible. The way a body identifies a food it can no longer process, not with drama, not with a decision, with the clean, quiet, involuntary signal of something that is no longer a match. Like a tuning fork registering dissonance before the mind has finished the thought. Explaining your depth to someone who uses your explanation as evidence that you are too much. The pattern of making yourself legible to someone who treated legibility as a form of demand has lost its logic. It operated on a belief that the right framing would eventually produce the right reception. That belief has dissolved, not through bitterness, but through the accumulation of its own disproof. What you are now recognizes, immediately and without effort, the difference between someone who finds your depth interesting and someone who finds it inconvenient. The body makes this assessment before the mind finishes the sentence, waiting for honesty that the other person has already internally decided not to give. That particular form of waiting has become structurally unavailable. Not because you decided you deserved better, because the body no longer has the capacity to sustain the particular quality of attention that waiting for withheld honesty requires. What is available to you now is not less than what was available before. It is more specific, more real, and it will recognize you immediately because you have become impossible to miss. If this person steps back into your field now, the first thing they will encounter is not a change in how you look or what you say. It is something underneath all of that, the ground beneath you, which is different, which changes the quality of everything that happens on top of it. The question of whether they return has genuinely stopped governing your interior. Not something you decided or performed. Simply what became true as a consequence of the work. And that is precisely why, if they do return, you will be able to see them accurately, possibly for the first time. Without hope bending the signal toward what you want to be true. Without fear bending it toward what you're afraid to trust. Just what is actually here. If what arrives is genuine, if the person who returns has sat with the full weight of what honest admission requires and actually arrived there, you will feel that. Not as a conclusion reached by analysis, as a quality in the contact itself. The absence of the particular tension that ambiguity always generated between you will be unmistakable. And if what arrives is not that, if what steps back in is the old dynamic in new language, you will feel that too. The body, calibrated the way it is now, will have an answer before the decision forms. Not a guarded answer, a clear one. If they do not return, that non-arrival is not absence. It is information that the connection served its full contractual purpose, and what was owed between you has been completely exchanged. Not a failure of love, a completion of it. Whether they arrive or not, you are no longer defined by which one happens. That is the shift. That is everything. If something in this landed somewhere real, not just as a thought, but as a recognition you felt somewhere below the thinking, somewhere in the body before the mind had finished forming its response, do one thing before you move on. Like this video, subscribe so the next transmission finds you when it needs to. And in the comments, write, "I receive what is mine." Say it out loud as you type it. Not for anyone reading it, for your own nervous system. Words spoken aloud complete something that words only read do not. Something in the body responds to the sound of your own voice stating a truth that you are ready for. Let your nervous system hear this one. And if someone in your life is standing at a threshold they cannot quite name, if someone you know has been carrying something between almost speaking and not quite ready, between the almost and the not yet, share this with them. Your instinct about who that person is right now is already accurate. Trust it. Venus is leaving Cancer today. What that means, in the most honest terms, the specific quality of emotional clarity this transit carries, its insistence on what is real over what is presentable, its refusal to let depth stay permanently private, is completing its work. What has been drawn up from the interior over these weeks does not go back down. It does not get refiled. It remains available in the light, in the full size of what it is, waiting to be spoken or received or simply acknowledged as the truth it has always been. Something that has been waiting in the almost, in the not quite, in the held back, in the thousand small rehearsals that never made it fully into the air, is arriving now. Not with announcement, not with the drama that long-awaited things sometimes carry in the imagination. With the quiet, unmistakable certainty of something that was always going to land here, in this window, in this specific convergence of planetary forces that made today unlike any other day you have lived through this year. You are not still waiting. The door that felt like it might stay closed is open. What you have been ready to receive has been ready to arrive for longer than you know. It is here. It is real. And it belongs to you.